Welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. Excited to let you know that you can now pre-order my new book, You Can Change Other People, the 4 steps to help employees, colleagues, even family up their game. I wrote it with Peter Bregman, who is my coach teacher, my coaching mentor, and it's now available for pre-order. And when you pre-order, you get a whole bunch of fun, valuable bonuses, including 3 recorded demo conversations where we show you exactly how to go through the 4 steps with real people, and a 1-page cheat sheet so you can follow along. The book itself, when you pre-order, will arrive in your mailbox or inbox on September 22nd, 2021. Here's how to do it. Go to plantyourself.com/pre. That's just P-R-E, all lowercase. That will forward you to the page on the Bregman Partners website that has all the information about how to pre-order. Basically, you just order somewhere, either online or at your local independent bookshop, and you send us the receipt via email, and then you get your bonuses. So I'm really hoping that you will help me make this book a big success. I hope you will find it very valuable, and that once you get it and read it, you'll use it and recommend it to others. And so if you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you have gotten value, this is a really easy way for you to give back. It would be a huge help. So again, that's plantyourself.com/pre, P-R-E, all lowercase. All right, let's get to today's show. Today, my guests and I are talking about marriage in particular and relationships in general. And boy, did we have a fun conversation. Went into a lot of depth, a lot of breadth. And it was fun to spend some time with a couple who have been together for a quarter century and obviously still really enjoy each other. So my guests are Gabriel Mann and John David Mann. We were introduced by our co-publisher, Ben Bella Books, the company with whom Colin Campbell and I produced Whole and the Low Carb Fraud, and where the Manns, or the men, no, it's the Manns, 2 N's, produced The Go-Giver Marriage, a little story about the 5 secrets to lasting love. And I think you'll really enjoy the conversation, especially if you are in a relationship or thinking about being in a relationship or hoping to get into a relationship and stay in it and make it worth everybody's while. So here we go. Gabriel Mann and John David Mann, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so we're talking about your new book, The Go-Giver Marriage, a little story about the 5 secrets to lasting love. So I'm imagining, very few of my listeners care about love or marriage or lasting love. So this will be a very niche conversation, right? This is like
2 people out there listening, right?
Right. Like this is such a globally important book. And as you mentioned in the book, it's not just for marriages, but kind of committed relationships. And, I would go farther to say it's a guide to how to be a human being in a world with other human beings. So I first of all want to thank you for taking the time to write it.
Oh, our pleasure. Really. We've been wanting to do this for decades.
So.
Yeah, this book has been in its seed form for 2 decades. And we're thrilled because it really does apply to all relationships. It's an incredible book for parents, for your business colleagues, for, your siblings, your parents. I mean, the 5 secrets apply globally to what adults need, and it's applicable everywhere.
And also to marriages.
Yeah. And one of the things I really appreciate in the book is, which I thought is quite different from a lot of other books on sort of popular psychology, is you really go into like the theoretical underpinnings in terms of developmental psychology. So it kind of lends, because you could pick 5 secrets out of the air, right? And say like, hey, let's use these. And I'm sure there's plenty of other, quote, secrets that you didn't include because you're creating a framework for understanding.
Yes.
But you do kind of lay out, and I guess, Anna, this is your background as a therapist, the kind of, what human beings need from the very first days of life, and how those needs never go away. And like wanting them filled doesn't make us, immature or needy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can never be too needy. The question is, can the need be met, or is the other partner willing to meet that need, because we're all, at our core, there's a great deal of insecurity in the world. You know, part of the thing that drives people in business and in life is the desire to accomplish and to be seen, understood, and witnessed. It's such a powerful drive. And those needs never go away. You know, from the time that you're a baby laying on a blanket and somebody above you is Googling over you and blowing kisses on your belly, you know, that's a baby in their element, you know, getting witnessed by somebody who genuinely loves and adores them. Those needs remain.
All right. And I guess one of the corollaries is that the way we go about getting those needs met as babies has to change as we mature, and the way those needs end up manifesting in our lives has to change. But there's ways in which I think we can get stuck and relying on strategies that are no longer appropriate.
That is the ultimate mouthful right there, Howie, because nobody escapes childhood without wounds. And, you know, you may have been adored as an infant, but by the time you were a young man or a young girl, you may have had a parent who was very critical. You may have had a parent that was depressed. You may have had a parent who drank too much. And whatever behaviors you learned in order to adapt to all of that and to actually get into adulthood, you carry with you. And those behaviors don't necessarily serve you when you get into a relationship, but you may still be in that operational mode.
So before we get into the book itself, I'm really curious about any couple who would dare to write a book on marriage, because it feels like a very perilous thing. Right? Like I just wrote a book with a colleague of mine, which was about applying coaching principles to everyday conversations, and I'm not crazy about the title, honestly. It was called "You Can Change Other People: How to Help Colleagues, Friends, Even Family Up Their Game." And I got to say, my family's kind of pissed off at the title, and it's kind of cut my feet out a little bit in terms of like, are you using that book shit on me, right? Like, so John, I want to start with you. I don't know if you guys are comfortable talking about your own marriage.
Oh, yeah.
What? Us?
Yeah.
You mean we're supposed to know this stuff?
Yeah. Well, like you're the amateur here, right? You've come in. Yeah. So can you talk about your own sort of, you know, marriage autobiography? Like, what did you come in thinking marriage was, and what have you learned along the way from life and from Anna?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, and you're right. I am the amateur in the sense that Anna is an actual therapist, an actual, you know, trained person with a degree and everything. I just play one on TV. But what I'll say is that my years, I spent many of my years as an author. I published over 30 books, and many of those were nonfiction in the area of business, leadership, personal development. That's kind of been my wheelhouse until lately. And it's interesting. We were talking about this a bit before we hit record, that the human issues that arise in the areas of leadership in business, or in the areas of you know, accomplishment and success in the business world, really bleed over into our personal lives, and vice versa. So a lot of the same issues come up. So even though I haven't been in the field of marriage therapy, I've been in the field of working with human beings in relationships, and whether they're functional or not, you know, for decades. My own marriage background is, this is not my first marriage. I was married before. And I think it's kind of like having had a business failure and then turning around and becoming a business success. It's interesting, gives you interesting perspective on having lived through some of the things that don't work so well, or lived through some of the challenges, you know, that didn't resolve, and learning from those mistakes or those situations. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's a powerful thing. When we first fell in love, when we first came together, and we were first business colleagues, actually. We became extraordinarily good friends, and a very platonic intellectual plane. And it was only over time we suddenly went, holy cow, something else is going on here.
Uh-huh.
And once we fell in love, and we were a couple. I wanted to rush to get married. I wanted to get married immediately. And Anna said, I think we should take some time. What she was really saying was, I think you should take some time. Anyway, she was absolutely right. I needed to sort some things out. And it was only after we'd been together for several years, it was 10 years, Howie, before we actually got married. And during those 10 years, I came to realize that I had doubts about whether I was marrying material. I kind of felt like I needed to learn this whole marriage thing from the ground up. So it's something I've been looking at from that perspective as well. By the time we got married, we were just so insanely solid as a couple. We were like an oak tree with the roots that go down to the core of the earth, and this is my best friend, best companion, love of my life. We're just so insanely happy that for years, friends would say, what's your guys' secret sauce? Like, what's up with you guys? And it isn't like we had all rainbows and unicorns. We've lived through difficulties, tragedies, and circumstances that were extraordinarily difficult together. So we've had our bumps in our life, but everything we go through seems to just make us stronger. And for me, not having Anna's clinical background, my motivation in this book was, honestly, I wanted to share our experience, kind of codify it in a framework that people could grasp and take away and use themselves. I want people to have what we have, and have that in a way that helps to resolve whatever issues are holding them back from all the happiness and joy that they really could be experiencing.
And I wanted to actually simplify a cognitive behavioral approach, something that helps people to understand that neurologically, you change a bad habit by replacing it with a good habit. And in the business world, people talk about mindset all the time. But in the personal and relational world, people do not talk about mindset. They're more analytical and less cognitive,
holistic.
Less behavioral, less holistic, if you will. I think that there's a great many so-called techniques for, gaining the skills, if you will, to do better in marriage. But I think skills-based training doesn't always work. I think that it's much more about changing your mindset, changing your behavior. And when that happens, people actually develop new memories. They create new, intimacy and closeness as a couple, because instead of shutting doors, which negative behaviors really do, they cause people to pull away from each other, and they break down intimacy and closeness. I think that our goal with the book was to simplify and codify so that people could really go, oh, okay. It's a practice. Love is a practice. It's not an event. It's not a static feeling that you fall in love and there you are. It's not like that.
Gotcha. So Anna, I'm curious to get your side of the meeting story. And what comes to me is, like, you see someone who has, presumably licking his wounds from a previous marriage. What makes you say, here's someone who's been tenderized and learned lessons versus, here's a red flag. Here's a guy who just failed at the thing that I would want to succeed at. Like, what did you see that gave you confidence, hope, or optimism?
I'll tell you, John is not only a reader, but he's somebody who learns from his experiences. He's reflective. He has a good sense of not just personal identity, but personal understanding. And even though I think that he felt emotionally he was ready to dive in, but eventually sort of slowed down and really looked at why had his marriage failed and what was going on under the surface for him. I think that he just was always willing to learn. I remember him reading different books on men, on marriage, on, just really examining the landscape, if you will, to understand better what it is that he wanted in a relationship. And I also feel like we had a friendship first. And, I always encourage couples when they're falling in love, wait, like really develop the friendship, really get beyond that romantic bliss so that you can sort of see how the other person ticks and understand whether or not you're compatible at the deeper levels of relationship. And John has such a capacity for relationship. He's very strong in friendships as well as in his direct interactions with people in his world. So I really feel like, I kind of knew, but I also wanted us to go slowly. And I kept encouraging him and myself, if there's going to be red flags on the field, discover them before you get married. So I just feel like, I don't know, we were both very much in love. I don't think anything could have really dampened it.
Gotcha. So you mentioned like thinking about like what you want out of marriage, and there is a series of a couple of chapters in which that question is posed as a cliffhanger, right? So this isn't a a how-to book about marriage. This is a story, right? That is a novel that reads as a story about human beings that then has sidebars and deeper exploration. So this is like, you get into the people here and you like root for them and you're worried about them and you smack your head at some of the things they do. And so there's this like mystery, thriller aspect to the question, what is the purpose of marriage? And I have to say, I want to be like really honest about this. Part of me loved the answer and part of me was uncomfortable with it.
Interesting.
So can you talk about, and I'll see if we can have a conversation about what I loved and didn't exactly vibe with. Can you talk about like what you see as the purpose of marriage and why it's such a secret that people don't get it?
Yeah. I'll speak to that for a sec. In that, what we see often with relationships that are in any kind of trouble or any kind of difficulty is that people start out, in love and everything is fantastic. The other person's amazing and you can't spend enough time with each other and everything is just superb. What could possibly go wrong? And then life intervenes, then reality kind of encroaches. The stresses of circumstance, of your job or your career, kids, finances, homes, et cetera, et cetera. People have accidents, people get illnesses. And every one of those storms that buffets you kind of tears at the pole of the attraction, at the relationship, at the foundation. What we see is that many people come over time to feel like their relationship itself is a series of compromises. That in order to stay with this person, you have to give up little pieces of yourself. You have to kind of give in, do things their way instead of my way. Let them, watch the movies they like, not the movies that I like. And that we have to grudgingly do these things to make them happy because otherwise they're not happy. And if they're not happy, we're not happy. It starts to feel very tiresome, like this great compromise.
Right. And that every example of that is kind of like, oh, this was a red flag that I missed. Like, if I had picked really correctly, we would want to watch the same movies. We would want to go on the same vacation spots. We would have the same views about raising the kids. So it becomes like there's this resentment about and regret every time there is this, inevitable, individuation.
Yeah, but to a degree. But the truth of it is that the only way that would not be true is if we married ourselves, because then we'd marry somebody just exactly like me. And there is nobody exactly like me. So no matter who you marry, no matter how well matched you are, there are going to be these differences where there's the give and take kind of feeling. What we wanted to convey, what I wanted to convey in this story, and for those who haven't seen the book, the first half of the book is a story about a modern couple, Tom and Tess, who are dealing with their marriage and other marriages. And then the second half of the book is Anna really kind of reverse engineering that, breaking that down and making it into practical steps for you to follow. But in the story, what I wanted to show is that marriage is, in the process of giving yourself to the other person, giving yourself to the relationship, investing yourself in the us, of the relationship and not having it about being you versus me, but actually investing myself into the relationship itself, that what happens in the long run isn't that I give up pieces of myself, is that I become a bigger person. I actually grow. I actually become a larger, richer, deeper, more reflective, more wise, more fulfilled version of myself than I would have been if I'd sat alone in a room getting everything that I wanted just my way. It can feel like a compromise. We believe it's the opposite. It's the opportunity, literally, of a lifetime to live a larger life. And the secret to that, for us, is this understanding that the perspective is not, it's about you and me. There's two of us in the room, but there's really three of us in the room. There's you, and there's me, and there's this us. We picture it as a tree in the story. There's this us, which is like a living, breathing entity. It's like a plant sitting there between us, which we both feed, we both nourish. And the perspective is, at all times, every day, it's never a neutral, stable thing. You're always either feeding the us, nourishing the us, or you're starving it. And if you focus on feeding the us, this tree grows and grows and grows, and it ends up giving us both shade, giving us both fruit, giving us both solace, giving us both support. And we live larger, more joyful lives.
So can we, concretize that with an example? Let's say the issue in which a couple is not seeing completely eye to eye is around relating to a child's misbehavior, right? And so one parent might want to set more boundaries. The other parent might want to, sort of therapize and understand more. Someone might be blaming the school system. Someone might be blaming themselves. That can be a very painful conversation on a lot of levels. How can that conversation turn out to be something other than compromise, but lead to growth?
I don't know. Do you want to address that, Anna?
It's a tricky question because there's always going to be ways in which you're not alike or not aligned, not on the same page. I think that it almost warrants talking about one of the secrets. And the secret that I would want to talk about is the third secret, which is called the secret of allow, to allow. And to allow is to really allow your spouse or your partner to be their own individual self with their own viewpoint and their own opinions that don't agree with yours. Because when you allow, you're really in a very individuated place. You are you, and you have this viewpoint, and they have that viewpoint. And the other thing about allow is that it isn't about trying to control the other person or the other person's viewpoint. The opposite of allow is control. And I think that sometimes when we're in those discussions that feel difficult, there is actually common ground, but one person is holding on so fiercely to control that they want to be right. It's not about a discussion. It's not about understanding and mutuality. It's just about I'm right and you're wrong. We need to punish this child because of this and this and this. I got spanked and it was okay with me. It isn't that black and white. There's two perspectives. And, if you're both willing to allow for the other person's viewpoint, then a conversation can happen where you can discuss it without it being reactive and without it becoming heated, in a way that's impossible to figure out.
Can I make this really concrete for a sec? So let me take what Donna just said and give you how take the child out of the picture for a moment. Give you an example, for us. So we're writing this book together, right? And we've had a lot of people ask us, so did you fight when you wrote this book? I mean, is it like hanging wallpaper? Did you almost get divorced over writing the book? And no, we didn't fight over the book. But this is my area. You talk about raising kids. Well, books are like my kids. I have a lot of, you could almost say control issues, but really you could say control issues.
Let's say quality control issues.
Yeah,
quality control. Yes,
I have a really high standard around the editorial aspect of books. So there's the creative side of actually writing a book, but then once a book is drafted, then there's the issue of refining it, editing it, and tweaking it and making it as perfect as you can before it goes to the printer. And one of the hardest moments for me in the life of a writer is when my editor comes back with comments on my first draft, because the editor will come back and say, I love the book, great ideas. Right here, I think this doesn't work. And I got to tell you, Howie, here I am, 30 books published, right? Knife to the heart. Doesn't matter how many times I've done this. It's a knife to the heart every time. And my immediate response, and I'm not exaggerating or kidding, my immediate response is, no, you're wrong. That's not true. I love you and I respect you, but you're wrong. The way I wrote this is the best way it could be. This is the way it should stay. And it's evolved to the point now where when I get the editorial comments, my reaction will be, no, you're wrong. I know intellectually that you're probably right, but I can't see it right now. So I'm going to have to go away for 5 days. Don't expect any response from me for 5 days. And I have to just sit with it. And eventually I come around, and what I discover is that I suck my thumb. Exactly. I got to throw my thumb for a couple of days and hold my banking and have a bottle for a while. And then I come around, every one of us has a little kid inside. I come around, find to the point where I can see that not only could she be right, this editor, but that her implementing her suggestion will make my book better. Mm-hmm. And that's always a moment of great discovery and great humility. The same thing happens with this putative discussion you described around the proper disciplining of our child. Anna will have ideas. And in our book, Anna had ideas for this book. She would write passages, and I would go well, she said this in a way that I wouldn't have said it. And I would go, but wow, the way she said it is better. It works for this book. It was a process for me to kind of let her in. We've never written a book together before. To let her into my book is how it felt to me, and let her be part of the creation process, and relax with that, and have it not just be that I'm letting her in, the compromise, but that actually it's a better book as a result. That's the bigger life. And that's what we find. Whenever I disagree with her, I find that if I just go to the third secret of allow the conversation to take place as possibilities, she's going to have some point of wisdom that I didn't have on my own, I wouldn't have had on my own, and that I can learn from and grow from. And she's right about something, and we can benefit from that.
And if I may add to that, the first portion of the book, the story, the parable, is very whimsical. I mean, it's very beautiful. There's an actual fairy tale within the story. Yeah. And it's so whimsical that one of my fears was that the actual points of the book, the actual secrets, wouldn't be understood by the reader. And so when I started writing the second half of the book, which really, this book divides 50-50. John did the first half and I did the second half. And I really wanted, and I made this clear to John, I really want the reader to understand what the psychological underpinnings are and why the secrets have power, so that they can decide, okay, this really does matter to somebody. I can bring this into the relationship, and these are the reasons why I need to bring it in. So I wanted to appeal to the analytical side of people, to the part that we're like, oh yeah, charming parable, but how do I put this to work? And John at first was like, I'd write a whole chapter on a secret and he'd be like, wow, I never thought about it that way. And so we really, there were real conversations. In the end, he not only loved what I added in, I think he really did feel that it made the book richer. But initially he was like, wait, I mean, we really were like, no, we need to handle our child differently.
That's right. I think we'd handle our child differently. Yeah. Right.
So I'm hearing a few things that I want to kind of throw out for your reflections. One is especially John's story about, some thumb sucking when you hear that feedback that feels like, either a knife to the heart in terms of like, you're a terrible writer, or you're not good at this, or wanting to,
your ideas are no good.
Yeah. Or wanting to, defend this child of yours. The first allowing wasn't allowing the other person to be, but allowing yourself to be. That it's hard, that if I'm going to, in whatever situation, to allow the other person to be who they are, I have to be willing to sit with and accept, as passengers on my own experience, feelings of shame, feelings of anger, feeling like all the messy stuff. Like if I'm not willing to kind of accept and process that in myself, then whatever I do for the other person is going to be a simulacrum of empathy and connection, as opposed to the real thing.
That's so brilliantly said. You have to be open to what is your own internal experience. That's like a conversation of emotional intelligence and emotional maturity. Yeah, I think it's. Anna, go ahead.
And well, I would just say that in one of the other secrets, one of the powerful aspects of that secret is being aware, getting your awareness really tweaked to the place where you're paying attention at a different level, not only to what's going on with your partner, but it's what is going on internally. So I think you speak to that really beautifully, because the journey ultimately is about self-awareness, because when you gain a greater self-awareness, you're deeply more capable in relationship.
There's also something interesting that happens, which is that, Anna spoke a little bit to the thing of nobody escapes childhood without some wounds. We each have these past experiences. They could be from childhood. They could be from our recent adult experience, or our teenage years. But they're, from moments before now. We have these formative experiences that send us off in certain directions. And we seem to have this uncanny capacity, like radar, to zoom in on the person we're going to relate with, we have a relationship with, who is perfectly picked to push the very buttons we need to have pushed or want to have pushed. Or to say it differently, the perfect person to present the opportunity for us to step into unresolved issues or open unopened doors in ourselves and develop ourselves. The partner is not a sparring partner as much as the perfectly chosen agent of change for ourselves to allow us to do that introspection you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like if we use the metaphor of like choosing a class in college, and you choose a class that you can get A's on all the tests, you can score hundreds on all the tests without studying, and you go, I picked the right class.
Right. Yeah. So where'd you go with that?
And for your listeners, if you really want to get a deeper understanding of that, Harville Hendricks and Helen LaKelly Hunt really developed an entire theory of how we match up with people who will plug us into our issues from our history in our childhood. And it's very powerful. If you can gain awareness about those things, you definitely have an advantage in being a stronger partner in a marriage, because it gives you a real leg up, if you will, in terms of being able to process things differently, being able to self-assess and understand and have a much more compassionate self for your partner.
When you talk about mindset, I mean, that's a core mindset about life, that, here's an opportunity rather than here I am being victimized.
Yes.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah. So let me share what was a little bit uncomfortable for me about, and so I don't know that we named sort of the purpose of marriage in a sentence, but I was trying to sneak the page. I didn't write it down, but basically it's the purpose of marriage is sort of to help you become the person you are meant to become. Right? Would you say that?
Yeah. The way he says in the book is the purpose of marriage is to, at first, when the fellow Tom is kind of chewing on this problem, he says things that you'd think that somebody would say, like, companionship and give a good home for our kids. And these are all things that are all great. But Jeremiah, the old man that he's talking with, says ultimately that in his view, the purpose of marriage is to give yourself to another human being, give yourself to another. And in the process, become your best self. So it's really it's a do. I can't wait to find out what's. Go ahead, Howie. What's the splinter in that for you?
Yeah. So what I look at a lot of psychology from as coming out of a Western individuated capitalist perspective, and I've done a lot of reading and study around indigenous perspectives, which have a critique of our society that I think is quite trenchant, because our society, as we look around, we're destroying the planet. We have more material wealth and prosperity than anyone could have ever imagined throughout human history, and yet it's so poorly shared. There's so much going on with our society that I'm actively looking for critiques that can. And so the thing that kind of stuck with me is this. It feels very individual, as opposed to if this book were written by, let's say, indigenous Australian, they would talk. The purpose is to create the person who is going to contribute most to your community. Marriage becomes more than just what two individuals can get out of it, but sort of gathered and nested in a community, not of other humans, but also of all living things, and that's kind of where I wanted more.
I totally see that. I
actually think that phrase does cover that, though, because to become the person you meant
your
to
best
be,
self,
your best self. I think our best selves are always in the service of the larger whole. And I think that when you really have the kind of connection, see, the thing is we're all relational, and relational expands from person to person to family, to the community, and to the globe, and to nature. I mean, we are not separate from trees, and there's the ecosystem is whole. So I'm actually very much a believer in the Aboriginal view.
But I'll just give you a quick example, and that is in that example in the book of Jeremiah and Tom. What Tom said when Tom finally comes to the place. I don't want to give spoilers of the book, but I'll just say when Tom finally comes to this place of what is his biggest self? What does he really always wanted to do? What is his big ultimate dream? He tells his wife, "I've always wanted to build a cathedral," and so his building the cathedral.
It's not Tom though. It's the
I'm sorry, it's not
fairy
Tom.
tale inside.
Yeah. It's not Tom.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's the young man. It's the young man in the fairy tale. I get them confused sometimes. They're alter egos. He wants to build a cathedral, and of course I won't say what she does, but that So we didn't say this in these words, but what is the cathedral? What is that? What is the biggest thing he can do? It is what's a cathedral for? It's for people to come worship. It's for the expression of the community about their relationship with what is larger than them. But yeah, I do think that if you take it further and say, so here's the purpose of me in relation to you, well, what's the purpose of us? And the purpose of us is to, just give ourselves to the world and be the best contribution that we can possibly be. That's the most fulfilling thing anyway.
And to make it personal, Howie, John and I have been together for 25 years, and this book has been a seed for 20, but the marriage is very strong and we are very close. And the closer that we became, the larger the impact we wanted to have out in the world became. Mm-hmm. And part of the impetus of this book for me, and I spent years publishing in psychology circles. You can write about an eating disorder, it goes off in some vague journal and gets read by a bunch of other clinicians and hardly ever gets to real people. Mm-hmm. So if you want to make an impact in the world, you have to get out into the mainstream in a bigger way. And so we really not just codified this book, but wanted to make the book be something that would put the concepts into place in a way that was readable, accessible, and powerful, and that would have an impact that would ripple across the pond and all over the world. We have people contacting us from India, from the EU, from Great Britain, from Australia. We have people that want to come from Australia to study coaching with us. The book came out in March. Already the ripples are broad in terms of the impact. And it's funny because I didn't have the dream of this book when I got married to John. It's something that has opened up and evolved. And I really feel like the very statement of giving yourself to another and in the process becoming your best self, this is the level that I've wanted to serve for my whole life. And I honestly feel like this book may be the catalyst that opens a lot of doors for people to really look at their marriage with new eyes and to recognize that love is a practice. It's not a static feeling.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for entertaining my doubt and helping to incorporate it.
And I'll add one more thing. A marriage that just is about joining, giving yourself to another person. I was initially uncomfortable with those words because to give yourself to another person can also mean to merge, to lose yourself, to not expand your horizons, to not become your best self. And it's what a lot of people in marriages do, Howie. Yeah. They join up and they just really want to agree on everything and be a lot alike,
Well, it's as if your book was only part one or part two, right? One of you would have lost yourselves.
Yes.
I just had a realization, John. I was just playing back something you said earlier about your editor.
Yes.
And when you said she, in my mind, I had a he editor. So it kind of like tickled me a little bit. I realized you're probably talking about Leah Wilson.
I could have been. Interesting that you would say that. My experience has been, at least so far, that of all the editors I've worked with one exception, they've all been women. So
okay, because I know we're both Ben Bella authors.
But yeah, Leah was.
So I am.
We have personnel in common.
Yes, I am one of the maybe a couple dozen people. I don't know how many manuscripts she's worked on, but we had a book that was done. It was perfect in I want to say like January 2012, and then we got back her edits. It was like another 9 months.
That's fun. I love it.
I'm going to quickly tell you a story about that because I think it's relevant in some way. So here's the book, The Go-Giver Marriage. Right? However, this, which we just wrote this year, comes on the heels of a series of Go-Giver books that go back to this one. This is the original book, The Go-Giver, which came out in 2008, which I wrote with a friend of mine, Bob Berg. And The Go-Giver, like The Go-Giver Marriage, is a story. This is more applicable to business, but really it's a book about human beings. It's about how to be a person in the world, how to be a successful person. Successful meaning not just making money, but successful being fulfilled, fully realized human being. So Bob and I got this book finished in 2005. Anna read the first draft. That's when she first came up with the idea and said this would be a great book about marriage. But the book wasn't published in 2005. It was submitted by our agent to publishers in New York, and 16 of them came back and all said no. No, 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 no. That's 16 no's. And, we took it back and messed with it and worked on it and then took it back to New York, and 12 more publishers said no, and then finally somebody said yes. The moral of the story is not to be persistent. The moral of the story is those first 16 publishers were right. It wasn't ready for publication. When we finally submitted it to the last publisher, we had covered every page with red ink. We'd work with an editor and work with our agent. And the book, the germ of the book, the uncut diamond of the book was inside. The possibility of it was in there in that original draft, but it was a mess. There was so much that needed to be burnished away, honed away. And I find that to be true of almost every manuscript that I've ever produced. And I find that to be true of myself as a human being. There's so much work to do to improve me, refine me, grow me, deepen me. And that's what it is that I find that a marriage is, aside from being a place of joy and companionship, it's able to offer me. It's like it's a magnificent universal editor to make me an improved version of myself, a better draft, a publishable draft, perhaps.
And also, Howie, since your book is a coaching model and a coaching model that can apply to the people in your life, which I find compelling.
Yeah.
And part of the reason the Go-Giver Marriage is a coaching model is because, we all have our story about life and about marriage and about our spouse, etc. But your story still remains just your story. And if you want to change the story, you have to change yourself. You have to change your behavior and your attitude toward the situation. And that's a coaching model. That's not a therapy model. We're not going to circle the story endlessly. Mm-hmm. We're going to change the way we think about it and the way we behave.
Yeah. And
that's what really makes such a profound difference.
So let me offer a little challenge to that, which is, so, I'm a coach. So again, I try to avoid anything therapeutic. And at the same time, my experience is that it's very easy to read advice and say, oh, I need to do this. And yet when you talk about no one gets out of childhood unwounded, like yes. one of the woundings, or many of the woundings end up neurological. And my experience
yes.
is when we are in fight or flight, nothing you write in your book is accessible to me, just biologically, because of where the blood is flowing in my brain. And so I'm wondering, like, one of the things that really struck me in the book is that, Anna, you say you don't work with couples, you work with individuals. You coach marriage to individuals as opposed to a traditional couples therapy. And like what I was pushing back on that in my mind is, if the other person is in fight or flight, I don't know that you have enough power to model enough safety to get the other person to, let's say, co-regulate with you on a biological level. And I'm wondering how you deal with that. You're saying, okay, here's secret number one, give compliments. And if that's the easiest thing in the world until I am in fight or flight or fold or some sort of neurological state where I'm not, socially engaged. And then nothing you say is going to matter because I'm just an asshole.
That's a really great description of what, being in your words, an a-hole really is about. And yes, that's actually part of secret number 3 in the whole allowing. You have to not only allow for that part of somebody to emerge, but you have to have compassion and understanding for it and be able to meet that person without being reactive. That's actually a huge part of the secret. And actually, when I say it's a cognitive behavioral model, what I really mean is it's a neurological model, in that if you don't change the way that you think about something, you can't change it. So if you're going to shift the way you're responding to somebody, you've got to shift your understanding of the way they're being. You can't just be reacting to what they're doing. You have to be willing to see it for what it is in the larger context. You probably would be enlightened by the work of Terry Real, because it's what is called relational therapy. And I've studied with Terry, and the truth is a lot of marriage therapy is about so-called skills. But when you're in fight or flight, skills are like, what? I'm in fight or flight, I'm in reaction. So what you're trying to help people to get to, and in some ways that's what Allow is about, is you're trying to help people get to the prefrontal cortex. And as a coach, you're loaning your client your prefrontal cortex.
What a beautiful way of saying it.
Yeah, you're loaning them your prefrontal cortex because you're helping them to reframe what actually happened. And I'll give you an example. I had a client recently where they are disagreeing about something specific with their children. And one person has a vehement I'm right perspective, and the other person really believes in their perspective too. They're not quite as blaming or shaming of the other person's viewpoint, but they still are both, off in their corners. And part of the coaching is helping the one who really, really is in that I'm right. I need to be in control here. I feel this is the way, it's my way or the highway kind of viewpoint to look at. And, in coaching, you sometimes do have to look at history. Okay, where did you feel out of control once before? Where does this out of control feeling originate from? Because when you describe the relationship, you're a victim to the other person's control. So where and why do you feel so out of control? And can you reframe it so that you can just be with that feeling rather than being so reactive? So you're trying to help them slow the interaction down enough so that they can both stay calm and they can both stay in a prefrontal cortex versus, and fight or flight is just being in the amygdala. You're in reaction, and that's the amygdala in action. It doesn't, and the amygdala is like, forget it. It's just crazy. You're all reaction and you have no compassion. Whereas the prefrontal cortex can look at the situation and say, I see that you're overreacting right now. Or I see that this is really a strong reaction for you. Can we talk about it? Can it slow down? Can you listen to my viewpoint versus just attacking it?
Right. Do you recommend or prescribe activities and exercises to help people, not in the moment of conflict or not, sort of outside the relationship? I'm thinking like, shooting practice free throws as opposed to in the game.
I not only do, but I give people direct advice on situations where they're, in this same situation, the one partner did something. They wrote an email to somebody and they were sort of trying to resolve a situation in business that had been very difficult. And the other person's perspective was, you already know who that person is in business and they're not going to hear you. They're not going to give you what you want. They're not going to give you the feedback you want. So why are you even trying? And, what I shared with them was, okay, you just basically attacked the whole initiative of this person trying to resolve something. And you basically made that person wrong for their approach. And what would it have been like if you said to them instead, who I see you as strong, I see you as competent, and I see you as not willing to take criticism from somebody who really doesn't care about you. So why would you try to appeal to that person and maybe, get shot down yet again? What I would love to see you do, because I see and experience you as powerful, I would love to see you hold the line and not try to resolve this by pandering to him on email. And the person kind of perked up in the middle of the session because they were like, you're right. That would be using appreciation to let them know how I feel about them and how I witness them as a powerful person. Because, he admitted that he saw her as very powerful and much more whole than this person who had attacked her. But she was trying to be diplomatic. And so he was criticizing her very action of how she was trying to handle it, rather than acknowledging, look, I see you as way more powerful than this person. Why would you pander? And can I encourage you to hold your ground instead of groveling?
That reminds me of an insight that came to my writing partner and me as we were working on our book. We sort of wrote our way into it in terms of like how to initiate difficult conversations with people that you want to change in some way. And like as a tactic, we said like it's useful to first of all to empathize, but then also to express confidence in them. And what we came to was like, okay, that's a great technique, but it can also be BS. And the realization was, if you're trying to change them, you are by definition confident to some degree. Like if you didn't think they could change, you wouldn't even bother having the conversation. So embedded in this conversation is my confidence in you.
Well, again, let's go back to it being relational as well. This person you're in a conversation with, you know something about them. You have an opinion on who they are. So you have the tools to actually appreciate them in a way that is holistic and authentic. I'm not talking about just blowing smoke and complimenting them. You described the secret of appreciation as passing compliments. It is much bigger than that. It is not a compliment. A compliment is shallow. An authentic appreciation is real. It's measurable. It's something where you're letting them know the way you witness them. And if that's positive, it's very sustaining and very powerful for the person that's receiving it.
Which reminds me of the one sentence in the book that has had the biggest positive impact on me in my marriage, which was you argue against the concept that love is blind, right? And you say love sees with eagle eyes, like, you know, for the woman who says, oh, you
the eyes of an eagle.
Right? You keep saying I'm beautiful, but that's only because you're blind, because I'm really not. And I love that. That like,
but you really are.
Like, I'm the one who can see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like every parent thinks that their kid is gorgeous, right? They're all right. All of them. Yeah, every couple who thinks that their spouse is just the most amazing person. They're not all wrong. They're all right.
And I see the emotion in your face, and I love it because your wife is multidimensional and beautiful in so many ways. Let me count them. That's your viewpoint. And so for her to dismiss it is, again, in the awareness of things, it's her insecurity. It's the part of her that doesn't feel beautiful, you know. And so, yes, love has the eyes of an eagle. You see the soft underbelly of the other person.
Love that. I love that. So you mentioned one of the sort of mentors in your process is John Gottman, right? Who's become something of a pop star due to the popularization of his work. I'm wondering, you know, like I've read like, you know, the Blink and the stuff about thin slicing and like the genius who can, the wizard who can predict in 20, whether you're going to get divorced from spending 5 minutes with you. What is it about his work that you have found most meaningful?
Well, I really want to start by saying that I have been heavily influenced by Harville and Helen. I have been heavily influenced by Terry Real, and I've also been heavily influenced by Pia Melody. I mean, you know, I really delve deeply into a background in trauma. The thing about the Gottman's work is the simplicity of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. You know, when you start talking about criticism and contempt and stonewalling, these are all, you know, behaviors and tactics that people have in marriages
and
that
so
really
easily recognizable.
Yes, they tear marriages apart. And when we started codifying the secrets, I had to give credit to them because the opposite of appreciation is criticism. The opposite of allow is control. The opposite of believing in someone is contempt. And so when you start really understanding the power of the secrets, you have to really understand the power of the polar opposite of them as well. That these are the things that you can fall into. And again, you know, you mentioned earlier a neurological approach. You know, every bad habit is replaced by a good habit that you spend the time to bring in and that you start to really utilize, because it will wipe, you know, when you're appreciating your wife and letting her know all the different ways that she's beautiful, you know, there's no room for criticism in that moment. And criticism really just sort of moves away. And even when you're authentically appreciating your spouse, their criticism of you moves away as well. Because it's pretty hard to criticize somebody who just told you that they deeply appreciate the fact that you're such a good daughter to your parents and that you're just always there taking care of things and helping and that you just see them as, you know, really amazing and powerful. And, that makes people feel like, well, why would I criticize him just because I picked his socks up off the bedroom floor this morning?
Yeah.
You know, it seems pretty shallow in the face of that appreciation.
Yeah, and it reminds me of sort of, you know, the Pygmalion effect, right? Of people live up to perceptions of them. And like that can give each of us so much power.
Yes.
Right. Like to I think everybody knows someone who just like walks around seeing the best in other people. And like how powerful that
This is the eyes of an eagle again. This is the eyes of an eagle again. Yeah. It's the secret to parenting. I mean, it's
I was
one
going
of
to
the secrets
say,
to parenting.
yes. May I say to your listeners, if you are a parent, read this book, because if you apply these 5 secrets to your children will soar like eagles.
Yeah.
I mean, they will have the skills to not only have amazing relationships, but you will have modeled for them how to be powerful in the world.
So we're coming up on the hour, but I do want to ask, you mentioned Terry Real and relational therapy a couple of times, and I just encountered that for the first time a couple of weeks ago. It was actually an article critiquing psychedelic assisted therapy for not including relational therapy, but kind of treating these psychedelics as the same way we would treat, Western drugs. Like the person is an atom, is an individual, and you pour something in them and they get better. And the article was saying without relational therapy, this is going to be a very shallow, quick fix. So I got interested in it, but I don't know much about it. So what can you describe, like how relational therapy plays into the work you do helping people in their marriages?
Yes, I would be happy to. First off, I'll say that Terry's really a genius. He's one of the first people who wrote about men and covert depression, which is really in epidemic proportions in the world. A lot of men are depressed, but they won't acknowledge it. They don't acknowledge it. Instead, they engage in powerful addictions, whether it be addiction to their computer, addiction to their work, addiction to porn, sex,
working out
too much.
How have you? Yeah.
There's a million ways to be addicted, and women conversely have addictions in the same way. Terry really, relational therapy is really an effort for people to understand the us and the prefrontal cortex approach versus the amygdala approach. We are relational creatures. We live, we grow, and we learn, and we bond in relationship. And it's not all about individuation and separation. It's really about how do we interact? How do we build stronger and stronger containers where the interactions are safe and where they're contained in a way that we can be powerful and we can be very intimate at the same time. So we don't lose ourselves. We actually gain a stronger sense of self, which I think is described in that line, to join with another and become your best self. So I think that relational therapy helps you to individuate, and at the same time, it helps you to have a global and more powerful compassion for your partner and for all the learning and growing that we all do. I think that when people are really in a marriage that embraces a relational perspective, both partners grow to their greatest ability and with great compassion and love for each other's places of vulnerability, if you will. Like if you are somebody who experienced incest or experienced a terrible trauma early in your life, or if you grew up with a parent who was alcoholic, neglectful, dismissive, possibly verbally abusive. I mean, these are all things that people have as background. And so relational therapy says, let's open up to really all of who we became. If you had a father who was beating you, yelling at you, and, there's so many men in the world that grew up under really abusive fathers, and they don't have the skills to be in a relationship in terms of really letting their vulnerability show, letting their emotional self come to the surface. And so they become very critical, very intense fathers, very dismissive fathers. And, when they wake up 16 years into the marriage and their kids don't really want to be with them and their wife is pretty unhappy too, it's time for a reckoning to happen. And for, so even though my model is not based on digging into deep history, in moments when somebody like my client I was just talking about, he's reacting to his wife from a very early place of feeling out of control. And he's judging her like crazy. And when he can shift that and move into a more aware prefrontal cortex, again, compassionate place, he can allow her to be powerful and he can give his support to her without diminishing her or criticizing her.
Gotcha. So I want to end with one question that I'm not sure if it's going to be useful or something you're going to want to answer, but it was on my mind in terms of, and you mentioned in your discussion of the book and the choices you made that you chose a couple who were like, it wasn't like extreme, right, in terms of their dysfunction, and they were also pretty well off, like they were, just socioeconomically. And there are certain buffers and advantages that come to people in relationship when they aren't at sort of the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And my question is, so you've written a book for individuals to fix relationships or, to grow into relationships. I'm wondering if you'd written like the Go-Giver Marriage Policy Manual. Like if you were suddenly, made, I don't know, co-heads of Health and Human Services or some, if you had like the power to make social policy, what sorts of things might you enact to support go-giver marriages?
Well, I want to just jump in and say this, which isn't indirectly, it speaks to that, which is, you brought up the point that the marriage, Tom and Tess, is not in deep trouble. And that was very conscious. There's brewing possibility of trouble there, right? But it's not at a crisis level. That was very intentional. And for me, it's similar to a health model. For me, if I were put in a place of policy around public health, the place where I would look is not in disease states, but in preventive and in wellness and in the ways that we take care of ourselves or deal with ourselves when we're not facing a health crisis. Because really, that's when the car is, when the engine's blowing up. It's a little bit late to start wondering about how to take care of the motor. Same thing with this. It's not that we don't want to help people who are in crisis. We absolutely do. But there are so many more people whose crisis is still down the road, but it's coming because of the way that we live our daily lives. So I just wanted to address that. But in terms of relationship policy, your new office, sweetheart, you have a new you're head of national relationship policy. What are your recommendations?
Well, actually, one of the reasons that we developed a coaching program and why this is a coaching model is that I think that therapy is inaccessible to lots of low-income couples. And I think that that there's a lot of capacity with this book to actually take on the secrets and take on the work without actually coaching with anyone. But I think in terms of policy, again, it's preventive. I would want to see more education. I mean, we do group trainings and we want our coaches to be doing group trainings because group trainings are inexpensive and they're accessible. And people get a lot out of when the secrets and their opposites get explained in a deep and very constructive manner. People go, "Oh, right, I didn't think about it. Yeah, I do criticize."
And they use it.
And they use it in a different way. I think education is power. I mean, I'm just a great believer in education. So to me, it isn't about trying to get people into therapy, but when you can create group models. And when you can educate, as well as create, I mean, we have teams now of coaches, then coaching can also be accessible, both through groups and also through individual at prices that are not even close to what therapy costs. And I think it makes it real. It makes it able to go out into the world and have an impact.
Right. Yeah. I remember when I started doing group coaching, it was kind of, my thinking was, well, it's for people who can't afford the gold standard. And I quickly discovered that in many ways, group coaching was better.
I agree.
Yeah, isn't that great?
When they start interacting and when you can create, I mean, the beauty of Zoom is you can create individual, one-on-ones back and forth with them and then come back to the group and discuss it. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for folks who are listening and intrigued, let's name the book again and let people know where they can find you and follow your work and get more.
The book is The Go-Giver Marriage, a little story about the 5 secrets to lasting love. Our website is gogivermarriage.com. And there you can find out all about our coaching, our different programs that we offer. And you can also listen. You can get the book. You can order the book. You can also order it anywhere online. It's on Audible. It's on, Amazon.
Do you guys read it?
Go to get it. We do read it on Audible. Yes.
We are the audiobook. Yes.
Did you both get to voice it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we go back and forth in the book, and we had a blast doing it. We did it in a local studio, and the big challenge was when you get right to the end of the story, neither one of us can read it without getting teary. And Anna was the one who had to actually deliver the last line of the book, and it was a good thing it wasn't me because I would have been amazing.
I had to really shore up. She had to go
like, I don't care about this. I do not cry.
All right, so gogivermarriage.com. The book is The Go-Giver Marriage. John David Mann, Anna Gabriel Mann, thank you so much for doing this work and for your willingness to spend the time with me to explore it.
Thank you, Howie.
Thank you for the fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. Yeah, really interesting conversation. Went all kinds of alleyways that were just so much fun to go through.
Awesome. Thanks again. All right. What'd you think? Was that worth your time? I hope so. If you want the links to some of the therapists and thinkers and researchers we talked about, and also links to the Mann's work and the Go-Giver Marriage book that you can get for yourself, you can find that all at plantyourself.com/516. So movement news, there ain't any movement because I have ruptured my left plantar fascia last weekend in a Frisbee game. Not sure exactly how that happened or why, but I'm in a boot and on crutches and enjoying a little bit the different view of life. When people who don't know me see me hobbling about, I sense a very different approach. So, and I'm also noticing how hard it is for people who have disabilities to do things like use a bathroom in a public place if it's not really specifically designed and set up for that sort of thing. There's just so much that's unnecessarily hard because of design decisions. And until I joined temporarily, I hope, the ranks of those who don't have full use of their limbs, didn't really occur to me. So that's kind of humbling. I'm hoping for, of course, a speedy recovery. I have been urged to not try to rehab too soon, but to let the stuff knit together. Been Googling, and the information on recovering from plantar fascia rupture is much more akin to religion than science. There's just not that much great data. So I'm just listening to my body, but mostly listening to Rafi, who insisted that I get crutches and a boot, and hopefully things will heal and I'll be able to do the big ultimate tournament in July in Denver. So I've got a couple of months for that kind of rehab. Garden news, we put up bean trellises, which this was before the injury. I can't do much of that right now. And Mia planted a bunch of beans that I've never heard of, including Japanese winged beans and really long beans that look kind of exotic, and lots of runner beans and pole beans. And also the garlic is coming up real nice. And I'm going to, as soon as I can, head out in the truck and get a big load of mushroom compost and shore up our beds. So that's what's been going on. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Filikanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Kelly Cameron, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gila Cert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Val Linneman, Nick Harper, Bandana Chawley, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Koppel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayad, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Marani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Peter W. Evans, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bilberry Elf, Marjorie Lewis, Trisha Adams, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paranganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Naik, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, Sarah Johnson, Catherine Floyd, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.